getting back to the original dream of the internet, putting back power in the hands of the contributors and the users of the internet.
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age, from the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast. The series is about how individuals and organizations use the power of curiosity to drive success in their lives and businesses, especially in the context of our new digital reality. It brings to life the latest understanding from neuroscience, anthropology, history, business, art, and behaviourism about curiosity, and makes these useful for everyone. My name is Garrick Jones. I'm one of the co-authors of the book The Curious Advantage, and today I'm here with my co-authors Paul Ashcroft.
Hello.
And Simon Brown.
Hi, everyone.
And we're delighted to be joined by Mathieu. Marc is a global marketeer with a successful career at the world's largest brands such as Coca-Cola, Unilever, and Samsung, and now leads strategic customer transformation innovation at Salesforce. Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, Marc.
Glad to be here.
Marc, you are a global marketeer with a successful career in some of the world's most recognized brands. It must have been incredible to experience this massive transformation in marketing with the shift to digital over the decades. Tell us about what you've seen and how you get here.
It's been a fascinating, evolution, to say the least. And I'm actually really excited that it keeps on changing. There's never a dull moment in the world of a marketer and the world of brands. One thing that I would say I've always thought about marketing and brands in particular is the fact that for me, a brand is really a product to buy, but also an idea to buy into. You always have those two sides of the coin, between the product and what it is that you're trying to put, in the hands of your customers, but also the idea behind the brand that you're trying to make them, fall in love with. What's interesting is that over the last several, maybe a decade, and especially the last few years and much more to come, there is a new piece which I think has become critical, which is you don't just need to have people, buy your product or buy into your idea. You also need to have the real buy-in of a community of people in what you stand for, in what you're doing, in your activities. And so this idea of putting the power back into the hands of not just the individual customers, but the community, and how the community works together to adopt or reject.
Would you say that's the biggest shift that's happened with digital today in the way that the world is reconfiguring itself?
What I find fascinating is there is almost a little bit of a, payback time. Early stage of digital was fundamentally a write-only web, what we called Web 1, which was the time when you could actually read a lot of information, but you could not participate. It was a one-way street. And then with the development of Web 2 and the social media platforms, it became a much more participatory world. And you really had the ability as users to contribute and to share, your images, your messages, your videos, etc. And people felt, oh, that's super cool, until they realized that they didn't own any of this, and that they, contributed to the internet as we know it, and then they didn't derive much, profit from it, much benefit from it. They didn't own anything long term. They were utilized in a way to grow the internet. And that's why I'm so excited at this moment in time about Web3, which is, making this new evolution of the internet from, an internet where you used to read to an internet where you could actually share to now an internet where you're giving back the ownership to the creators and the users of the internet, which is a radical shift.
Mark, can you tell us a bit for our listeners what Web 3.0 actually is? Because we hear references to it's the metaverse, or it's about crypto, or it's that we own our digital assets through NFTs. I'm really curious as to how things have evolved from static Web 1.0 through to Web 3.0. What's changed?
So it's a little bit all of the above. But the one thing I find really interesting, have you ever heard about a guy, Lou Montulli?
No.
Lou Montulli was actually an engineer who was 23 years old in 1994, who actually invented the cookie. And he invented the cookie that fundamentally, we have been using for, so many decades in marketing to track, customers. But in reality, he did it for the opposite reasons. He did it because websites had a lousy memory. And he thought, I'm going to embed a small text file that will be passed on between the user's computer and the website so that the website could remember the user, but without tracking the user. And so we've lived with this, for several decades. And now this is going away. The cookie is going away. So we have this whole focus on first-party data. And then coming back to your question on Web3, then you have the development of this new technology, which completely changes the paradigm. There is no more traceability. The cookie is gone. What I like to refer to as zero-party data, where suddenly people realize what they should have known all along, but almost we made them forget about it, that it's their data, period. That they don't need to share the data that they leave in the internet. They're in the decision seat, and they're the ones who can decide what to do with it, but also they can derive a benefit from that data, from that ownership in the internet. So to me, Web3 is, yes, it is crypto, it is NFT, it's metaverse, it is, underpinned under all of this by blockchain technology. But what I find really interesting about it is the fact that it is, if you go back to the original promise of the internet, it is kind of, getting back to the original dream of the internet, putting back power in the hands of the contributors and the users of the internet.
What does that power mean, I guess, for the users themselves? And what's the opportunity for organizations that are looking at Web 3.0? Is it that they're more limited because actually the data now resides with the user rather than with the company? Or what does that mean for people?
The data has always resided, or should always have resided, in the hands of the user. The fact that somehow some big aggregator, took that and said, it's mine, I own it and I'm going to, commercialize it, is actually a little bit of an oxymoron. I find that what's great is that people now know it's their data, and it puts them in a very strong position to actually say, hold on a minute, you want to sell me something, but what value are you adding to my life? How are you serving me with your product, with your marketing, with your service, with everything you do? How is that of service and of value to me? And I think this paradigm shift from selling to serving and this servant mentality, to me, is a wonderful evolution. And we've seen it accelerated, by the way, during the last couple of years with COVID, where people suddenly have been much more aware of their rights and their choices, much more able, because everything was done digitally on the internet, so they had full access, limited only by their ability to utilize the technology. And suddenly, if they were not happy with the way a brand was serving them, they shifted brand overnight.
Yeah.
And vice versa, if they encounter really good, not just customer service, but service in general, a brand that understands them and that really gives them what they want far beyond the product, then they became true fans.
I'm really curious, Marc, what Web 3.0 means from a creativity perspective for people. So from a curiosity perspective, one of the key aspects around curiosity is bringing new ideas, is testing out new things, applying creativity. It feels like this is a whole new world with Web 3.0 for people to be able to explore their creativity. Would you see it like that?
Yeah, I feel that when there's going to be more and more a totally unleashed creativity, which is going to be very interesting. And right now, it's still very much still influenced by gaming, because a lot of it was, born there, came from there. But I feel that the creativity of some of the graphics, of some of the content, but importantly, of some of the ideas is really unleashed. I mean, to take one of the most famous and project in the NFT world so far, which is the Bored Apes Yacht Club, who would have imagined building a brand that is worth now several $billion with 10,000 originally images randomly, generated, with a total new IP model where the purchaser are the owners also of the IP, and where they can augment the brand by creating all sorts of things with the IP that they bought, and then where you can actually take one NFT and mutate it, so you create again new content. All of this, to me, not even going into ApeCoin, all of this is really a relentless renaissance, in a way, of creativity, powered by the limitless possibilities of where the internet is today in terms of graphic and audio capability, everything you can do that. But also the fact that, and that's maybe the most important, is that you unleash the actual creators. You stop, with all due respect, having somebody tell them what to do. You let creators create. And I find that very often I've been frustrated by the way us marketers told people, creative people, that we knew better how they should do their job.
Everything you say is turning marketing upside down. I mean, you speak about the shift from the individual to the community. You talk about the shift from sales to service. And then you talk about unleashing the creativity of the individual. I mean, the world is turned upside down and I'm curious about how the individual within this community, within this place where you guys are serving the public through the tools that are built, how does this play out in your mind? I know, for example, you are leading the Web3 studio at Salesforce now, which is astonishing. What does that tell us about your approach to branding and marketing, or what organizations have to do in this new digital reality?
We're going to see a very interesting shift for the first time in stopping thinking about marketing as an expense and thinking about it as an investment. An investment which is no longer going to be just about, renting some media properties for a few weeks, a few, days, a few seconds, but investing in actually the community. And I think that if you think about a total paradigm shift, since we're talking about upside down, where you say your community is your new media. And therefore, you're going to need, the same way that you invested or bought media, you're going to need to invest in the community. And really, you won't be able to buy a community because you can't buy people. And what you will do is you will need to invest in them and create value for them and be of service to them. And that investment, that's why I use the word investment, will have long-term, impact if you do your job well. Whereas otherwise, every year on January 1st, you needed to start all over again and put a bag of money, for the media buy, because otherwise you had no media plan.
No.
And so I find that this shift of saying we can now invest really money in serving people is a fantastic evolution of marketing.
You're listening to the Curious Advantage podcast, inspired by the book The Curious Advantage, written by Paul Ashcroft, Simon Brown, and Garrick Jones. Subscribe to the podcast today.
Marc, the other thing that we're very curious about is the metaverse. And thinking about what you were just saying around communities and where our communities are going to be, well, some of our communities are now going to not be where they used to be, frankly. And we're seeing all kinds of organizations lean in quite heavily, from banks to retailers, and other organizations. Could you tell us a little bit about what are your experiments with the metaverse? Where do you see this going next?
What's interesting is when you look at the metaverse, which seems very alien to a lot of us, the reality, you have the Gen Z, but even more so the Gen Alpha, that actually, are born with it. The generation Alpha is going to be the largest generation ever, 2.5 billion people. And these people will be born with the metaverse, with NFTs, with the decentralized autonomous organizations as their norm. So for them, it will be a common ground. What's interesting is that when you spend, and I know sometimes if I say spending, several hours in the metaverse, it sounds not really great. But if I say spending several hours on your phone, it sounds like everyday reality. Yeah. So, if we had said that for you 2 years ago that we would spend so many hours on our phone, we would have said, well, we don't want that world. And yet here we are on Zoom, on your computer. So the reality is that we talk a lot about inclusion and equity and equality. What I find fascinating is that the metaverse helps a lot of people unleash multiple forms of their identity that sometimes is actually more true to who they really are than the image that they create or that we create for them, that we put on them because of the prejudices of the world and the way that prejudice, impacts people's ability to be authentic, to express their true identity. And when somebody spends, more hours in, some games or in the metaverse or in some, because it's not all the metaverse, it's also all those, new social networks like Discord, which is all that world of Web3, then I really think that they're able to express an identity that is, for them, much more real than the identity that has been imposed on them in, the real world, part of it by some of the odds ways the world creates inequalities.
Marc, it's quite an insight there that, if I understood you correctly, you're saying that in some ways we can get to know our customers, our communities better in the metaverse because in some way people are more real and we're not just, let's say, categorizing or grouping people up into personas and standard groupings that we're trying to communicate to. We can be much more personalized in the way we interact with them and with each other. That's quite a shift as well.
What's interesting is that we've been focused on trying to understand people by name, by phone number, by email address. But in reality, sometimes we have failed in that process to understand them by, true identity and passions, things they care about. And in this new world where, in a way, the digital wallet is the new cookie, where what's in your wallet is totally transparent. Everybody can see what's in a wallet. What you can't see is who owns the wallet. But do you really need to know you are Garrick or you Paul or you Simon in order to be of service to you? Or do I just need to know what you're passionate about, what you truly care about, and how I could actually really be fulfilling some of your desires, your dreams, which is really the essence of marketing.
That then creates all sorts of challenges because potentially people can have multiple avatars, that they might have a professional avatar, they might have a personal avatar, they might have whatever else. As you say, the wallets are then anonymous, maybe, so therefore those avatars can't be traced back to an individual person. So our traditional ways of understanding someone, as you say, email addresses, telephone numbers, all of these, no longer applies, but my interests do. So I guess it brings it back to what you were saying earlier of, as a marketing organization, how to service that. And it can't be a superficial trying to sell. From what I'm hearing from you, it's much more, I have to serve that community with a genuine interest in my product or my area. How does that change the whole marketing paradigm?
Well, that's exactly the question I wanted to ask too, Simon. The way I visualize the metaverse is through Luc Besson's film, Valerian, and the Man of a Thousand Faces, and they go into this enormous supermarket, and it takes place in a game, essentially. But how do you market into this?
Yeah. And again, I feel that I like everything. I personally don't think that it's all about the metaverse. That's why I'm really interested by the underlying principles of Web3, which is the blockchain and smart contract, because that's really the game changer. It is the fact that you have a new technology that authenticates, but also removes the need for intermediaries, which frees us up from all kind of go-between, in reality, the end user and the marketer or the brand. So to me, that's the fundamental thing that I'm interested in. Whether it's going to manifest itself in the form of a very creative, NFT program or a very interesting metaverse activity. The reality, I think that the same way that we talk about multiple touch points in the digital world, there will just be more touch points. It won't be 100% metaverse or 100% this. It just augments the number of touch points. And that's why it's so interesting to have this conversation around, the curious advantage, because it does make it really much more complex. And I love complex problems. When we just had, let's say, newspapers and billboards, nobody thought that you needed to know by name the person who was going to see it or read it so that you could target them. I've always hated that word targeting. I always said, why do we want to shoot the customers? Why do we call them a target? Marketing has become more and more interesting because of that complexity of channels and of mediums. And I find that it's adding another level of complexity and therefore ability to be much more creative about it. And as always, there will be people who will use these new technologies for good, and there will be people who will use these technologies, as we have with the previous iterations of, Web 2 and Web 1 and before, with the idea that, but I can still find a way to track people. I can still find a way to target them. But the reality is, I really feel, going back to the point we were talking earlier, it's this total unleash of creativity now in the hands of millions of people who before were not authorized to be fully creative the way they thought. And now they're in direct access with their customers, with their communities. And that's phenomenal.
Marc, I know you're a curious individual from our conversations to date. How has your own personal curiosity helped you to navigate through your career as a marketeer, but in particular, how is it helping to navigate at the sort of forefront of this new world that we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, I've always believed that 3 circles of knowledge, you know what you know what you don't know, and then you don't know what you don't know. And that 3rd circle has always fascinated me. I even had somebody when I was working at Coca-Cola who always said that that's how I had defined her job, in my team, to be in charge of that outer circle. But I really feel that I'm somebody who loves to try to understand what are the things that I don't know that I don't know. And to be fair, Web3 was one of them. But what I found really interesting is, again, I always say I do marketing, not because I love marketing, but because I love people. What I find interesting is going back to the original promise of the internet and this putting back power in the hands of the creators and the users is that it is actually putting people back at the center of marketing, as opposed to putting people at the end of a chain where we consider them consumers and their job to be done is, as is to consume.
Are there any tips for anyone out there who, as a leader, is also navigating in that world of sort of ambiguity and fast-moving digital tech? Any suggestions from your experience on how to lead through that ambiguity?
One of the things I'll say, and we probably have talked about Web3 far too much, the average user and the average development of the technology today. But one of the big challenges of this new field, new evolution of the internet, is kind of like a rabbit hole. Once you get into it, can't get out. You just want more. You have this appetite. And so I would say pay attention to what you want for, because once you lean in, then it's endless new possibilities. So some people may not want to be too curious, because it does, add a significant number of hours to your day. And my day, just like yours, is still 24 hours. But the reality is that it's a world like every new technology, right now, completely uncharted. And that's what excites me, is that whoever leans in can not only learn a lot, but shape a lot. And my hope is indeed that the collective power of the marketers, to me, and all the people that are in the end going to throw some money into the metaverse and into NFTs, etc., initially to benefit their brand, is that they do it with a sense of purpose, with a sense of ethics, with a responsibility for sustainability. I really believe that Web3 is going to evolve with proof of stake protocols towards a much more sustainable solutions. So the reality is, I think that if we can all use the collective power of business and marketers to make Web3 not just a paradigm shift, but also a better solution for the actual users of the internet, who, by the way, for many are going to be your children, my children, your grandchildren, my grandchildren.
Marc, it's been fascinating talking to you. It's a whole brave new world. And one of the things we talk about in our book is how do you enter new worlds and how do you approach it? How do you deal with it without being afraid? How do you build confidence? How do you learn and map and so on? But you've been talking to us about things like Web3 and also the inventor of cookies and communities, the shift from the individual to communities that all this new digital world is bringing us, from selling to serving, how it impacts on our approach within it. But you also talk about how marketing is shifting to becoming an investment, especially for the Generation Alpha, the 2.5 billion young people who are coming next, who will be brought up in this world that has been created. You talk about decentralized autonomous organizations where, that's going to become the norm. The metaverse, where we have multiple identities and our digital wallets being the new cookie rather than our identities. It's spectacular how you're selling to the avatar, not selling to a person. The identity is the most important thing. I mean, I've taken away so much. The underlying principles of blockchain and smart contracts being really important, and the unleashing of the creativity of these billions of people who will have direct access to the market, and how this has the potential, whether we achieve it or not, we don't know, but has the potential for unleashing sustainability by having proof of state and so on, can bring about a magnificent shift in the world as we know it at the moment. That's a lot. And we've done a lot in a short amount of time. I knew speaking to you is always a pleasure, and there's always full of exciting ideas. If there's one thing to leave our listeners with, Marc, what would it be?
Yeah, one of the things I had to do with this new world is I had to shift one of my marketing mantras. And I used to say marketing used to be creating a myth and telling it, and it had shifted towards finding a truth and sharing it. That was my definition of, Web 1 marketing, or, creating a myth, advertising, telling it, big media, to finding a truth, being much more authentic and trustworthy by the customer, and sharing it using social media. And for me now, I've added a third chapter, which is join a community and serving it. And this idea of joining a community and being of service to it, serving that community is really important. And when I say joining, you really need to join, but you also need to, you can't choose it. You can choose the affinity that you think you have with that community, but the community needs to choose you. And I find that this, new iteration from telling to sharing to serving is really incredibly exciting.
That's brilliant, Marc. Thank you so much. You've been listening to Curious Advantage podcast. We are curious to hear from you. If you think there was something useful or valuable from this conversation, join the community. We encourage you to write a review for the podcast or on your preferred channel, saying why this was so and what we learned from it. We always appreciate hearing from our listeners and having a curious conversation with all our subscribers. Join today, #CuriousAdvantage. The Curious Advantage book is available on Amazon worldwide. It's a bestseller. Order your copy now to further explore the 7 C's model for being more curious, and subscribe today and keep exploring curiously. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast.
The Curious Advantage book is now available to purchase on Amazon.
Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Aliki Paolinelis and John McGinty and edited by Jill Damatak-Futter.